Hello and welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West, the show where American grit meets British backbone. Tonight, MAGA world at war. There's tensions in the movement that made Donald Trump erupt on multiple fronts. Because something seismic is happening inside MAGA. Israel, Epstein and the price of eggs spark rows, rifts and retribution. Take the very public divorce between President Trump and his one-time super fangirl, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Trump branded her Marjorie Taylor Greene after days of potshots from her across the liberal media. And she didn't hold back. Have a look at this.
I was called a traitor by a man that I fought for 6 years for. And I gave him my loyalty for free. I won my first election without his endorsement, beating 8 men in a primary. And I've never owed him anything, but I fought for him for the policies and for America first.
Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene is pitching herself as the new leader of the America First wing, but she's far from the only person to be demanding that President Trump refocuses on domestic issues. As that fight rumbles on, another fault line opens. A bill to publish the full Epstein files is hurtling towards the president's desk tonight after senators unanimously agreed to pass the transparency demand. Meanwhile, and as ever, some of the biggest MAGA influencers are spending their week once again bickering online about Israel. Now, with next year's midterms looming on the horizon, the White House has spent the week trying to talk about affordability and the economy. But tonight, we ask, is MAGA going to blow this? Joining me in the studio is Alex Swoyer, the Washington Times editor-at-large, great title if I say so myself, and the Washington Examiner's Jim Antle. Guys, stay there. We're going to come to you in a moment. I think down the line from New York, we've got Fox News contributor Joe Concha. Good evening, Joe. It looks to me like, they control the Senate, they control the House, they control the vibes. The Democrats are still in chaos, still reeling from 2024's defeat. And just at that moment, it looks like the coalition that made Donald Trump, put him in the White House twice, nearly 3 times, is tearing itself apart tonight.
Well, perhaps. If there's only really one person that's rebelling at this point, and that is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is like Timu MAGA. I don't know, what Timu is, but
I think we got you.
Okay, like a cheap version of it. So all I know is that Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's gotten on a lot of liberal networks here in the United States, CNN, MSNBC. She's getting glowing profiles from the press that used to hate her, and now suddenly she is adored. So if I saw a big movement against Donald Trump among the real ranks within the Republican Party, I'd say, yeah, there's a big problem here. But at this point, the Epstein files, I think when these things are released, and that will happen soon, and we see that Donald Trump is not in them, and I'm pretty sure of that because I'm certain that the first 3 times that Donald Trump ran for president, it would have been weaponized against him if there was any evidence of any wrongdoing. So once this thing blows over, then Marjorie Taylor Greene will be off the front pages, off cable news, and we'll head towards 2026 where you brought it up before. Affordability is what's going to decide that election, not the Epstein files from November of 2025.
What is she up to, though? Because after the couple of weeks ago, the result in New York, the result in Virginia, the result in New Jersey, yes, these were blue states, but it wasn't a great night for the Republicans. There was messages out of the White House from JD Vance saying, we need to start focusing more on the home front. A lot of sort of movement figures have popped their head above the parapet to say, hang on, this direction is not where we need to be going. Too much focus on foreign affairs. Is Marjorie Taylor Greene a sort of symptom of that, or is she a sort of canary in the coal mine for a wider sort of testing of the water and a wider sort of rebellion against the man that keeps this whole thing together?
Well, I think that she wants to run for president in 2028. She's trying to create her own MAGA wing.
I think we get some popcorn going there.
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting? But she would be like an Eric Swalwell, where she'll somehow pull below 1% and be in the race for a long time and say a lot of provocative things. In the end, she wants to own the MAGA movement now. The MAGA movement without Donald Trump is like the Sopranos without Tony Soprano. It simply does not exist. So I think this is all for attention. It's all for clicks and views. And maybe one day she could be a co-host on The View, but I don't think this is a serious person with really serious aspirations.
Yeah, it's remarkable how quickly the liberal media and the old networks get people on when they're willing to slag off Donald Trump rather than anything else. Beyond Marjorie Taylor Greene, though, there has been some tensions in the wider conservative world. It's been rumbling on for 3 or 4 weeks now. This Tucker Carlson row over whether he should be platforming, Nick Fuentes, the anti-Semitic, sort of pint-sized, sort of, what is he, a blogger? No, what is he, sort of podcaster, YouTuber? Provocateur. There is a sort of ongoing split about how close this administration should be to Israel. It does feel like the president doesn't have the sort of iron grip that he once had on the movement, and it is starting to perhaps look towards a post-Trump world.
Well, that world's coming sooner than we think, I guess, because remember, presidential campaigns start 2 years before the actual election. So right after the midterms, we'll be talking about JD Vance and Marco Rubio probably being the Republican ticket, and then 25 Democrats running on the other side, vying for that side. So, yeah, I think that, again, we're still 1 year out from the midterms. So many things can determine what happened there. And in the end, if Donald Trump's tariff bet pays off and we actually start to see prices come down, people feel it, interest rates come down, stock market continued to do well, not so much this week, but it came back a little bit today. I think that's what ultimately decides this election, and not all these rumblings, because Democrats have a civil war on their own front. Clearly, with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer particularly being targeted to be ousted, and new leadership being put in after losing that shutdown. That was a pretty big deal as well. So both parties have problems right now, no question.
It does strike me that it's slightly baffling, certainly to me, and I imagine to millions of American voters, that they took basically a month off of Congress, and they've come back and argued about a dead paedophile, and ended up, the Democrats have ended up shooting themselves in the foot on this one. You've got one congresswoman literally texting Jeffrey Epstein live from a committee hearing. You've got Hakeem Jeffries begging the guy for money after he'd been exposed. I mean, it's a sort of curse on all their houses, really. The Democrats are desperate to make this about Donald Trump, but it's ended up making them all look a little bit ridiculous, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Larry Summers, for example, the former Treasury Secretary to Obama, just retired, or at least resigned at Harvard. You mentioned Stacey Plaskett, it's not so much she was texting Epstein, 20 years ago. This was after, he was indicted for sex trafficking. And then this is the guy that you're looking for cliff notes from. That's a bad look. And Hakeem Jeffries obviously taking money from as well. Not a good look as well. The only person where I haven't seen any evidence that, profited or made money off of Jeffrey Epstein is Donald Trump, the guy who threw Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago 10 years ago once all these allegations came to light. So I have a feeling this is going to have a boomerang effect on Democrats, because they are really hyping this so much with innuendo that when it doesn't come through, just like the Russia hoax, this is something that are going to play a price for politically.
I mean, do you think it was that tactical in terms of Donald Trump's shift towards saying, actually, you know what, publish and be damned, get it all out? I mean, that was his original position, and then he changed his track over the course of the last months. He's now back to where he was on the campaign trail, saying, get it all out. Did he have a look at that and think, well, this is embarrassing Democrats more, or did he just realise he was going to lose the vote?
I think in the end that he just found it. He was objecting to it at first because he didn't want to give Democrats a win, because that was their focus. He's like, all right, I don't want to say I'm weak to them and bending the knee to this, because I have bigger fish to fry here as far as all the problems that I'm trying to fix in this country as a result of everything I inherited from Joe Biden. I think he saw it as an annoyance and a distraction, and then just said, all right, you know what, just get this off the table so we can move on to bigger things. That's where he seems to have landed on this. But it could have been handled better, I'll say that. Clearing
the barnacles off the boat, as we call it, back in England. Joe Concha in New York, Fox News contributor. Always a pleasure to see you, and always so succinctly put there. Thanks for joining us tonight. Jim, Alex, welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West. I mean, it's the point there that Joe was making. This all could have been handled a lot better, right, Alex? I mean, it seems that ever since really the Mandami result in New York, the sort of the quite comprehensive thumping in Virginia, the worse than expected result in New Jersey, there has been a bit of a wobble in the White House, and actually their attempts to try and get the narrative back to groceries and cost of living and affordability and potential checks from tariff bonuses, it's all being slightly drowned out by sort of things that are out of their control now.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different take.
Excellent, that's what we like.
Well, my take is that Democrats, the polling started to show during the shutdown that blame was shifting. There was a YouGov analysis, I think, early November that showed, the blame was on Republicans, and then it started to decrease by 4 points, and all of a sudden they came around, and they had to start, don't look here, let's not talk about the shutdown, let's not talk about that. Let's look towards what worked before. Epstein files. That was something that did divide the base, that whole rollout. I think you were talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene. She seized that previously when there was going to be disclosure of the files, and then wait a second, Pam Bondi said something, no, that I don't have the files.
The files were sitting
exactly.
on the list, the client list was sitting on their desk.
And so I think that was something the Democrats were seizing on as a distraction from the failed shutdown maneuver that did not work out for them. And that's where this is coming from. And I think President Trump is just saying, enough is enough. We're not going to give it to them. Let's get it all out there.
Jim, if it was a plan for the Democrats, a cunning ruse to try and seize the agenda and seize the narrative, it's blown up in their face, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know quite how cunning it was. Initially, this was the first thing they've ever done that seemed to split Trump's coalition at all. Right? But they've done some other things in the past that have worked, but this is the first thing that really resonated with some subset of the president's supporters. And so the Epstein files seemed like something they could seize on, especially since some of people in Trump's orbit, including the Attorney General and the FBI director, appeared to really overpromise on what was going to get released. And there's still a lot
up
of
the influencers as well, dragging them in with these, these binders and boxes. That was
overpromise, underdeliver. I think is exactly what you were getting at.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that another problem is that there's going to be a certain number of people who are really invested in this who are ultimately going to be unappeasable because they've already predetermined what is going to be in the Epstein files. And if they don't see those things, they are going to say that those were hidden in the redactions of whatever redactions exist, or were somehow not released as they were supposed to be.
And this goes on and on.
So if there's no smoking gun about Trump or Clinton or Israel, some of these people can't be placated.
They're still arguing about the JFK files. They were released, and they said, "Wow, well, there's still more." Alex, let's try this theory. I think ever since the horrific death of Charlie Kirk, there has been a sort of vacuum in the wider sort of, not leave aside the politicians, but the big faces, the Tucker Carlsons, the Jack Posobics, the Turning Point Brigade, the Heritage massive row. That horrific incident has actually really shattered some unity within the MAGA world, within the right, within the wider Republican movement, that hasn't really, recovered from that. Is that fair?
You're right. I think that's a fair analysis. I think part of that is because Charlie Kirk, I think it would be fair to say, and the names that you just listed, was probably the closest to the Trump administration, to the Trump family.
He was there helping pick cabinets.
Yes, and no one else seems to be that close, whether it's to the president himself, to one of his sons or family members, or JD Vance, for example, the vice president. So I think until there's a relationship like that, you are going to continue to have a vacuum.
It felt like Charlie Kirk was almost a bulwark against some of the, kind of crazier fringes of the right. His former friend, I suppose we call her now, his friend Candace Owen is pumping out some horrific sort of conspiracy theories that don't really seem to survive the point of contact. Turning Point tried to initially ignore all that, but now actually are addressing it one by one. You got Tucker playing some sort of strange game, which I think seems to me more about Israel than anything else. Sort of normalizing people like Nick Fuentes, who were on the very fringes of the movement until a matter of weeks ago. Is this about wrestling control not necessarily about the midterms, but about picking the next Donald Trump, the next leader?
Well, I mean, Donald Trump didn't just hand out the Trump 2028 ball caps to troll, although I think that was a pretty
it worked pretty well.
reason.
I have one.
But he also wanted to stave off when he was going to become a lame duck, which, part of the problem is this is an unconventional second term. It's a non-consecutive second term. So Trump is already focused on legacy stuff, isn't running again. But for the movement and for the party to remain unified, he kind of does have to act as if he's running for re-election. Certainly, JD Vance would benefit if Trump has an eye toward 2028. The thing about Charlie Kirk is, Charlie Kirk was a rare MAGA leader who was, by temperament and nature, a team player and unifying. He wanted to bring people together. And rightly or wrongly, a lot of the other personality types that are involved and who are major MAGA influencers are sort of not that way by temperament, by inclination.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you got your Steve Bannon saying he's going to, potentially eyeing a run for president. I mean, JD Vance has said he will have a talk. He'll have that discussion after.
I think he's eyeing it.
Yeah, of course
when
he
he
is.
was down at the Turning Point USA event, I think it was in Mississippi, and they started chanting 48. I don't know if you noticed there was a pause. He totally soaked that in.
Smirk.
You could see it.
Yeah.
I will say I worked for Steve Bannon in the past. I worked at Breitbart when he was there before he went into the Trump administration in 2017, I think it was, the first Trump administration. And I loved working for him. One of the best bosses I've had. Despite everything you read in the media, he's amazing. So I just have to put that out there.
We'll come back to Vance in a moment, but on the Bannon point, presumably he doesn't necessarily think he's going to be the president, but he will be running to keep the MAGA world pure, right?
I think he
get on the debate stage.
He tries to hold people to account, to your point. And then also you brought up the Trump 2028 hats. I was just actually in Florida at an event where Laura Trump was speaking. It was a pro-life event, Action for Life, and she did address the Trump 2028 hat, and she said, we love it. We just haven't said which Trump.
Exactly.
Maybe that's a little tease. I don't know.
It strikes me that it's JD and Rubio's ticket to lose, right? Yes, obviously it's a long way out. There's some suggestion that Vance has been keeping somewhat of a low profile of the last couple of weeks. Hasn't quite, he's walked a very delicate line on the Tucker Carlson stuff. He's obviously. He's on the record as saying that Tucker is his friend. He employs Tucker's son. There's a suggestion that maybe, just maybe, he's starting to put a little bit of distance between him and the guy down the end of the corridor. Is that fair?
I mean, I'm interested to get your take. One of the things I'll weigh in on real quick is just, I know CPAC, that's always been big. They've never let Nick Fuentes in. Like, there's actually been security issues to ensure that he's not there. Yeah. And, maybe there's something to do with some donors, money that's saying enough is enough. Like, we don't need this mess.
Yeah. JD Vance putting a bit of distance there, putting a bit of ankle to the movement.
Well, this is the only challenge I think that Vance really faces, at least within the Republican Party, is that anybody who's a sitting vice president, while it gives you a leg up over everybody else, you also become responsible for whatever the administration does. And President Trump is not a guy who's going to cede the spotlight as willingly as. Well, Joe Biden didn't really do it particularly willingly, but he certainly, once they shuffled him off the stage, was gone. Yeah. Whereas Donald Trump is not a man who goes away lightly. He had already had a split with his previous vice president, so he's going to be looking to see whether Vance stays loyal as the spotlight shifts more toward him.
While the younger generation try to pull him in maybe an even more America First isolation.
And Vance has to hold off anybody like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Steve Bannon who is going to try to run as the purer than thou alternative.
What about from the other side, though? What about Marco Rubio? Because on paper, he's the more experienced politician. He's not the vice president, but he was a senator long before JD Vance was. He has had a longer, more distinguished career than JD Vance. Surely he'd be like saying, hang on, it's my go. Wait.
And honestly, I think a Vance-Rubio ticket would kind of help balance the party a little bit. There's a lot of people in the party that remember Rubio as more of the establishment when he was in the Senate.
Right.
And so, when you have Vance more of the MAGA wing, Rubio more of the establishment, I think that they seem to work really well together, and they could do so come 2028.
So you got Nick Fuentes threatening to flood every single campaign stop from Iowa to New Hampshire to South Carolina when Vance and co turn up with 10,000 groypers to if he gives 1 inch on Israel. I think the threat was this. I'm old enough to remember when this kid was saying vote for Kamala Harris. Like, does he actually have the influence that he has? He's got a very loyal, slightly bonkers, very young, mostly male online following. But does it actually materialize in the ballot box?
The thing is, having a successful podcast and being able to govern and campaign successfully are two completely different things. And you can simply be provocative. People can hate watch you, hate listen to you. They're not going to hate vote for you, right? So you can be. We also don't know how much of his audience is international, because there's a big European far right that might be attracted to this. A lot of them speak English. Are there 10,000 groypers in the country? I think that's the whole country, much less in every congressional district in Iowa or wherever. I think that's a big question. How influential are the influencers? Trump 2024 bet, I think correctly, that internet can be real life, and they played
and
that medium
spoke
very
to
well.
new audiences that wouldn't necessarily receive his messages.
The Biden people ignored their online.
Hey, but they
in
have
2020.
Beyonce though, so it was fine.
They have other outlets. Yes.
We've got to go to a break in a sec, but how important is it that kind of Trump remains on the ticket in some way? Obviously, I'm not talking about Donald or Eric or Barron one day, perhaps, but what I think those elections showed last month, was it earlier this month? Earlier this month, was actually when Trump isn't on the ticket, the Republican organization on the ground, just doesn't get the same number of votes out.
Yeah, so two things. I interviewed a senator recently, and he said that the support for President Trump on Capitol Hill has never been stronger, and that its leadership under Thune, as well as over in the House Johnson, that they communicate. It wasn't like that before. Right. So you saw that shift when McConnell left as leader. It seems like that his influence on the Hill is getting things done. There's more unity. Does that go out to, for the election? What happens there? You talked about New York, New Jersey, Virginia. I think it would have been huge if Republicans had any shot there. Those were blue territories. In Virginia, I think it is, the past 50 years, there's only been one time a governor has been elected from the same party as the president.
Virginia
so,
curse,
I mean, I think it would have been surprising had Republicans done well in either of those states. We knew New York was gone.
Jim, if you were advising the White House now, how confident would you feel about 2026? I mean, the attempt to slightly put a thumb on the scales with the redistricting has hit some legal snags. This is existential really for this administration. We're not becoming a lame duck because it will be back into impeachment and endless inquiries and crypto investigations and the like if they don't win, right? So this is kind of must do or die.
It's hugely important. I wouldn't be super confident right now, but I would say there's still a long way to go. And I do think they are starting to pivot back to domestic issues, which is what they really need to do. Of course, if they don't win the midterm elections, domestic issues will be off the table for them entirely.
Guys, we've got to go to break, but lots more to discuss after that, including a latest plan to bring peace to Ukraine. But who leaked it? To me, it looks like the Russians. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. You can follow my adventures last weekend across the great state of Mississippi. Lots of exciting things going on there, lots of content, and you get to see me going to a tailgate in a suit, which was a new experience, I think, for everyone involved. Now, the Trump administration has been quietly negotiating with Moscow on a brand new 28-point peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. And it seems to me that the Russians decided to leak it. It makes for grim reading. Ukraine forced to surrender territory it currently controls and reduce its armed forces to a husk. It sounds a lot like lipstick slapped on Putin's big demands that he's been making from day one. So no wonder senior Russian officials are already signalling their optimism. The plan's a brainchild of envoy Steve Witkoff, who some say is taking advantage of Zelensky's corruption crisis in Kyiv to foist a bad deal on an ally. Other insiders say the plan is dead on arrival and is nothing but Russia's maximalist demands dressed up with some bullet points. So it raised eyebrows to see President Trump today dispatch Army Secretary Dan Driscoll plus 2 four-star generals to Kyiv for emergency talks alongside Witkoff's negotiations as well. Still with me in the studio, Alex Swoyer and Jim Antle, but joining us tonight from Kyiv, Katerji, Ukraine correspondent, war correspondent, filmmaker extraordinaire, a man that's been chronicling this awful conflict now for many years from the capital of Ukraine. Good evening, Oz. How are you?
Good evening, Harry. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's been a difficult 24-hour period for Ukraine. 26 people dead in this strike in western Ukraine in the early hours of the morning. So, these are the realities that are, just daily in and outs for Ukraine. And I just feel that it's important that we highlight that while all these talks are happening, Ukrainian civilians are still bearing the brunt of all of these attacks.
Oh, absolutely. The Americans seem to be trying to do lots of different things at once. We had the news tonight that the official Ukrainian envoy, Kellogg, has said that he will no longer be taking part in these negotiations come January. Suggestions that he's been sort of undermined and undercut by Steve Witkoff, who had some success, I think it's fair to say, in Gaza, bringing a ceasefire around there, releasing the hostages. It was a deal done by suspending all normal diplomatic, routes and norms, and done over the sort of business table with the Gulf states. President Trump finally putting sanctions on Russian oil companies 2 weeks ago, which was a welcome surprise, I think, for many. And now Lindsey Graham is saying he's greenlit further Ukraine support bills within Congress, and he's publicly saying that he's annoyed with Putin. Yet this plan of Witkoff's that's leaked tonight, and it looks like the Russians leaked it given Witkoff accidentally tweeted that, it must have been the Russians and then swiftly deleted his tweet. That plan looks like nothing more than what Putin's been demanding since February 2022.
I mean, you sum it up well there. These are the exact same demand. They are basically a surrender document being, presented to the Ukrainians over and over again by Steve Witkoff, who has proven without a shadow of a doubt that he doesn't have a clue what's going on here. He just basically sits there like a yapping dog in every meeting with the Russians and comes back saying the same thing. It's important to note that there is a conflict within the Trump administration about how to deal with this. You've got people like Witkoff and Vance who basically just want the war to go away. They're willing to give Russia whatever it wants as long as it ends. And then you've got Rubio and Kellogg now stepping away who have a very different position, a much more hawkish position towards Russia and towards Ukraine. The Ukrainian strategy has been to just basically do whatever they can to agree with Trump, to get him on side and to demonstrate that they are showing that they are ready for whatever kinds of, ceasefire. Whatever Trump's asked for, the Ukrainians have basically been like, yeah, we'll do it. And the Russians have been the ones that have ultimately failed to turn up to negotiations, failed to agree to things, back out at the last minute. But the biggest point, the biggest takeaway you have to take away from this is that these demands that Ukraine withdraws from its own territory that Russia doesn't control is just so absurd that no Ukrainian government would survive trying to enact those policies. There would be riots on the streets, absolutely, if that was the case. So
you made a point earlier on, I think it was on X, that the Russians don't, the Ukrainians don't have to seek the Americans' permission to carry on fighting if they want. They don't need to seek the Americans' permission to cut a deal. The armed forces wouldn't wear this. You let alone you talk about the people rioting, but the forces on the front line wouldn't put up with this, would they?
Yeah, I mean, look, the military has a very important role to play, but it should be stressed that, like liberal democracies around Europe, the military doesn't have a political role. So there hasn't really been a huge amount of pushback from the armed forces towards anything going on. But I do suspect that they would have something to say about abandoning the fortress belt. Again, it's a total non-starter. The idea that Ukraine would give Russia its most heavily armed, heavily defended cities and then reduce its armed forces and reduce the weapons that they've got. It's just inviting Russia to invade. It's so preposterous that I think even the Russians know that it's absurd. What's immensely frustrating for Kyiv is that Witkoff seems to be, just convinced that trying this over and over again is going to work. And
the definition of trying the same thing over and over again. We've heard that one before. Just while you're here, though, it's not been a great couple of weeks for Zelenskyy. He is up to his neck. Well, his government is up to his neck in corruption scandals. Key figures are falling like flies. Those figures are getting closer and closer and closer to his office. For the first time since the war started, you've had opposition MPs really say, the war consensus is over now. Yes, we need elections, and yes, we need a new premier. How much trouble is Zelenskyy in? Question one. And do you suspect that Witkoff or others are taking advantage of that domestic weakness that Zelensky is now in. There's no love lost between this administration in DC and Zelensky. Are they taking advantage of his political weakness to try and foist him into swallowing a deal that he wouldn't otherwise have been able to, wouldn't otherwise accept?
So I do think there's probably people looking externally and thinking that this would be a good moment to increase the pressure on Zelensky if you're trying to get him to concede to things. But I think it's also important to note that I would say that the trouble that Zelensky had when he briefly suspended the autonomy of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the bodies that are now carrying out this investigation, and there were protests on the street. That seemed to be a more dangerous moment for Zelensky than now, whereas the bureau's doing its job, prosecutions are starting, politicians who are involved in this, yes, they may be close to Zelensky, but they are. The National Anti-Corruption Bureau is being seen by the public to be doing its job. And yes, there have been some calls from the opposition, but not necessarily aimed at Zelensky, definitely aimed at the ministers in the government that have been responsible.
Kira Rudik, the Liberal MP, has been saying, quite openly that it's time for a new leader.
I mean, look, there are some voices that are saying that, but I don't think it's like widespread overall that people are calling for that kind. It's still it's not the consensus view of the opposition.
Okay.
Put it that way. And I do think that Zelensky will probably survive this period, but it's certainly an unwelcome distraction domestically at a time when Ukraine is trying to gather international support. And that international support is so dependent on Ukraine proving itself that it can deal with its internal corruption
that was going to be my final question. You took the words quite out of my mouth. Fine, he might survive domestically, but how damaging is this when he's going around Europe and he's going around America, shaking the tin, trying to negotiate new weapons, trying to negotiate new finances, new investments, rebuilding funds? How damaging is it to him on the world stage amongst the wider coalition that it looks like the sort of what everyone slightly suspected and has known for a long time about vast parts of Ukraine's society is that, is he really getting this under control, or is it just been the war's just suppressed coverage of it, and actually this is all going to blow up again?
I mean, look, this anti-corruption stuff has been happening for a long time in Ukraine. This particular investigation is a culmination of 14 months worth of work. So a lot of work has been going on behind the scenes before we reach this point. So I would stress to people at home, like my view from Kyiv here is, as long as the anti-corruption bureaus are seen to be doing their job and are doing so unimpeded by Zelensky, he will continue to have that legitimacy, not necessarily overwhelming support or whatever, but the legitimacy to carry on in the position that he's in, as long as the National Anti-Corruption Bureau can carry on the work that they've been doing, which is warmly received in the public or widely behind. So it really depends on how these waters are navigated by Kyiv over the coming few months. Definitely one to keep an eye on, though, 100%, Harry.
It's Katerji in Kyiv. Keep your head down, stay safe, and thanks for joining us as ever. See you very soon, I hope. Still in the studio with me, Alex Swoyer of the Washington Times, Jim Antle of the Washington Examiner. Alex, Donald Trump would like nothing more than an excuse to basically say, time's up, buddy, Zelensky. We don't think there's peace while you're still here. This goes way back to the original Hunter Biden
You
stuff.
were reading my mind.
Yeah.
I think there's some bad blood that goes all the way back to when he was wanting them to, Rudy Giuliani was going to work with Bill Barr to find out if there was some sort of server that ended up in Ukraine. He was impeached over that.
Yeah, part of the original impeachment process was a phone call with Zelensky.
Yeah, so I think there's just been years of, a bad taste in Trump's mouth when it comes to Ukraine, and rightfully so. You just talked about the anti-corruption. I mean, the country's been known for corruption. And I think the American people are hesitant about that. They've heard so much about that, and then they see how much tax dollars were going to Ukraine. Of course, it's not that they're on the side of supporting Putin by any means, but I think that everyone's antennas are up and they're ready. Just that America first. I think there's a move for isolationists. Like they want to see their money spent here. Look at what we have with our education system. There's a lot that it could be done.
Jim, the president promised to end this war in a day, a week, a month, various different iterations. The Alaska summit basically put everything back to square one. Right. The Budapest summit that was mooted last month has, yet failed to materialise. The Russians clearly are stringing him along, playing a merry tune. They haven't changed their maximalist demands. War weariness, as Alex says, amongst the American public is massive, and not just psychologically, but in the wallet as well. At some point, is the president just going to lose his temper here and just be like, I'm not going to swear because we're going out live on the radio in Britain, but, F it.
Right. Well, I think he's gotten close to that a couple of times, but I think he's really invested in the idea of resolving this conflict, and I think...
For his gong.
for his legacy, and I think the fact that they were successful in Gaza, at least in the short term, in the immediate term, when they weren't given very good chances of succeeding, I think has really encouraged him to want to try. I think the problem is he really hasn't found an effective leverage point over Putin.
Well, the oil stuff seems to be hurting. Russian oil exports down to their lowest level in 2 years.
And maybe that will do it eventually, but it hasn't done it yet. Russia perceives itself to be winning the war, and there is a limit to what the United States is willing to do. And there's a limit to what Europe is able to do, regardless of what they say. So unless the economic situation becomes really untenable, which perhaps at some point it will, Putin, I think, feels that he can simply wait all of this out and eventually wait Trump out. And also, to a certain degree, if the conditions on the ground in Ukraine get bad enough, even a bad deal eventually starts to look like a good deal. But I think there are still a lot of forces within the Trump administration that don't want to do that. And I think Trump himself is frustrated with Putin. He thought he'd be able to persuade Putin to see the error of his ways, and he hasn't.
He says every time, doesn't he? He says every time I talk to this guy, he promises me the world, he says this, and we have these great conversations, and he does the exact opposite. The oil sanctions were a big moment a couple of weeks ago. MBS leader of Saudi Arabia was obviously in town. I think he's still here. He was definitely here last night. I think he's still here today. One phone call from Trump to MBS and asking him to turn on the taps and of oil production could put the Russians out of business pretty quickly. Yeah,
and I think it would be smart to move in that direction. I think also, to your point, President Trump has been, in the past, it seems, trying to use, honey to catch flies, trying to be really sweet towards...
Carrots versus sticks.
Yeah.
And he's taken a lot of political heat for that as well.
Oh, so much. Like Putin's puppet. How many times did we hear Democrats say that? I think Nancy Pelosi, that was one of her favorite sayings. But it doesn't seem to be working, and now you're hearing him kind of change his tune a bit. Yeah. There's some frustration. And I think that they need to go back to the drawing board. There's something he needs to do differently here, because Putin, trying to get through to Putin is not working.
It does. This administration, compared to Trump 45, 1.0, whatever you want to call it, has been remarkably disciplined. At the very top of the administration, Rubio, Vance, to some degree, Hesketh, they're a pretty tight ship. There hasn't been the same briefing wars and everything. On this one issue, it feels to me like this is the first time it's really started to crack, when actually we're starting to read and report on, actual open divisions within the administration, Jim. Kellogg, I can't remember his first name for the life of me, I apologise. Keith Kellogg, there we go, I should have remembered that one. He has, he's walked out basically and said, basically Witkoff is undermining him, undercutting him. Oz there in Kyiv was talking about the sort of difference between Rubio and JD Vance on this matter. It is clear that there is tension in the otherwise pretty tight Oval Office.
I think that's true on foreign policy in general. I don't think that's limited to Russia, Ukraine.
Okay.
I think the Middle East may be the
Venezuela
only area
as well?
where there's more or less, much lesser in Venezuela. But it's pretty clear Rubio is driving the boat on Venezuela.
I wouldn't want to be driving a boat anywhere near Venezuela right now.
Pardon the pun.
The escape boat. He's driving the escape boat. But Russia, Ukraine obviously is just been an intractable issue for this administration. And I think that's where you're going to see some of these divisions and frustrations come to a head. It either gets resolved or it doesn't, rather conspicuously. Whereas on some of these smaller issues, they can pivot or deprioritize pretty easily.
Alex, critics of the president kind of unfairly and underestimating him, say, he just regurgitates the last thing someone told him on this issue. I think that's probably not quite true. Do you think we'll see a resolution to this within the, within his, before the midterms, within the active part of his presidency?
I hope so. And, I think that his focus will be there. It sounds like it is. It's one of the areas that he's looking towards for his Nobel Peace Prize, right? Yeah. But to your point, I think it's great when there's some disagreement.
Creative tension.
Yes, I do. I think sometimes some of the best results come out of that. More ideas, as long as there's not too many leaks, we should be good.
Well, the leaks certainly have dried up, which is a shame for all journalists trying to cover this administration. It was much more fun last time around. Right, don't go anywhere. When we come back, more Trump, more Saudi Arabia. Welcome back to Harry Cole Stays West. As I said earlier, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube because we eat some barbecue in Jackson, Mississippi. That was quite a moment. Big warning lights for the GOP, as we were discussing at the top of the hour. A brand new Axios poll shows Democrats are surging on the generic midterm ballot. Polls can be wrong. They certainly got it wrong in 2024, but they are up a hefty 8 points. That would be their biggest lead in nearly a decade. Alex and Jim are still with me. Alex, the Democrats have had a rough few months. They're leaderless, they're rudderless. They can't decide whether they're going to go for America's toxic boyfriend in California, Gavin Newsom, or go down the crazy socialist route, or try and
Fang Fang's boyfriend, Eric Swalwell, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's
or see if they can find some more deep state former CIA agents to run as moderates in rural America. It's on paper, they are all over the shop. But I think the reaction to the presidency and the reaction to the Republicans, the reaction to the shutdown, seems to mean they're getting some natural churn just anyway. Right?
Yeah, I think that polling is always kind of beneficial for the party not in power at this point. But I'm going to wait and see. Yeah. Because I'm one of those that tends to not always believe the polls, especially this early. I think look at what happened, especially in New Jersey. There seemed to be neck and neck polling within the margin of error. I was told that everybody in the Republican side felt really good, like New Jersey was going to happen. It didn't. To your point about the party and a leader, I have to say, I think it could be the New York City mayor, Mamdani. That is the new Democrat.
He's articulate, he's good looking.
And he's charismatic.
That's a model that's worked before for the Democrats.
Yes, it is. And sometimes I think that wing of the party, and it's kind of curious because really with the popular vote in 2024, it felt like the country was moving more towards the center to the right. And then you have the Democratic Party with their leadership now, or the loudest people at least, moving further to the left. Yeah. It's like they're not kind of in tune with what the popular vote was. I'm not really sure how that will play out when it comes to the midterms or even
we've seen this movie play out in Britain, and hard shift the hard left can be it can cause sort of excitement and cheers at music festivals and young people sharing TikToks and dancing in the streets, but actually when it gets to the crunch of things and it gets to the ballot box, it ends up with a historical defeat, Jim. That shift to the left, it might make them, the sugar rush of it might make the Democrats feel better. They might even win big in cities, coastal cities, fine. Places that already voted for them anyway. Yes. How's Mamdani going to go down with, the good people of Mississippi?
Probably not very well. The thing is, when we talk so much when a party loses the election about how much they need to change and all of the things that they need to fix, and that's true to an extent, but in the last 25 years, all either party needs to do when they lose an election is wait for the other party to get into power and screw it up. And the elections are so close now that a shift of 3 points to the left or the right really makes a very dramatic difference in what these election results look like. So that's going to be the problem, I think, for Trump and the Republicans. Yes, I think having people like Mamdani emerging as the future of the Democratic Party is frightening, and it's something that they can use to their advantage. And Mamdani actually having to govern a major city, not just campaign and give speeches, but it's really hard. It's really hard to fix inflation, number one. And number two, it's really hard for the party in power to gain in midterm elections, especially when you're the party of the low propensity voters. Democrats will show up to vote in dog catcher elections if it protests Trump. They'll climb over glass, broken glass, to vote against Trump. Trump's voters maybe only want to vote for him. It takes a lot more to motivate them to turn out.
How do you think Mandami and Trump are going to get on? There's been suggestions that the White House might veto his security clearance, which would be pretty petty, I think. I mean, at the same time, game respects game, right? The guy, Donald Trump loves New York. He keeps it's the first New York Post is the first newspaper he opens every single morning. He's obviously following this stuff very closely. At some point, they're going to have to meet. What do you think that's going to be like? Do you think there's going to be? It could be a weird sort of, not bromance as such, but there could be some. These are big players in their big party.
I mean, I think it'll be like all politicians. They'll be nice to each other to their face, and then they'll get. We'll have to watch it all unfold on X how they really feel. I think that the best playbook for Republicans for the upcoming elections is what's going to happen in New York City with Mamdani. You brought up, how would he play in Mississippi? I'm thinking more like your swing states, right? Let's talk about Georgia. I'm pretty confident they don't want government-run grocery stores there, right? I think that that's going to be the Republicans' playbook to see what New York looks like, what happens. Same thing that they do out in California. And we'll have to see what happens with that governor race, too.
Indeed. The Democrats do, though, seem already kind of slightly hostage to the left's fortune. There was some of their biggest sort of voices were furious with the leadership, Jim, for saying the quiet part out loud, essentially, that they climbed down on shutdown, which would prove the whole point. It was them that was causing it all along. Yeah. Bernie's encouraging AOC to run. AOC sort of showing some ankle. Barack Obama's ringing up Mandami. He didn't quite endorse him, but he did offer his services and advice and friendly sort of hand before it. The left have already taken over the shop, right? It's just the fact that has anyone actually realised it yet?
I mean, the left is the activist base.
Yeah.
The left is their younger generation of elected officials.
Even the so-called moderate in the Virginia governor race, who ended up winning, still couldn't define what a man was, and still was essentially at the debate said she'd happily let men into children's female dressing rooms.
100%. A moderate in today's Democratic Party would have been a far left liberal 25 years ago. So. Yeah, the left has really won the war here, the ideological war for control of the Democratic Party. There is a little bit of pushback from some of the Democratic donor class, but not much. And so, and I think as long as they see encouraging poll numbers, they see things like this year's elections going well for them, there's no reason to back off. They were contemplating maybe backing off after losing to Trump a second time, which is always psychologically very damaging to Democrats. But if they think they've got the upper hand, full speed ahead to the left.
The first sort of polls for 2028 are out, Alex, and it does have Newsom. I mean, he was on about 29%, I think. Not comprehensive. Kamala Harris is still polling 13-14%. Is it Newsom's to lose, or is there a sort of dark horse, do you think, that could come riding over the hill to their rescue?
I think that everybody talks mostly about Newsom, but it's still early. I know there's a lot of people that talk about wanting someone a little more moderate. The governor of, is it Maryland? Somebody's been talking about, there's some Midwestern people too.
Kentucky.
Some of the yes, maybe Andy Bashir, is that who it is?
Bashir.
Yeah, so there's been some people trying to throw that out, Democrats even, recognizing that could play better come what we're talking about with the popular vote, what we saw in 2024 happen. I think it would be a big mistake to go far left. I think I would put Newsom in that category, but I don't know if the Democrats themselves would.
Clear a lot of his baggage, a lot of his COVID baggage. He's trying to clear a lot of his wokey stances off the thing. I think Rahm Emanuel, that's the one I want to watch. Right. that would be entertaining and certainly very sweary. Now look, I want to play a clip of what Donald Trump said on Air Force One when he was having a small interaction with a Bloomberg journalist. Let's play the tape.
Sir, if there's nothing incriminating in the file, sir, why not acting as a...
Alex, if a man, whoever he is, said to you, "Quiet piggy,"
you
kick him in the nuts. You kick him in the nuts.
And I think I asked you guys, it was is she overweight? I mean, I couldn't see who it was, but that's instantly what I would think. It's a little off-putting, but it's also President Trump and the way he treats the press. I guess it's just kind of no surprise, right? Just kind of like
used to
every day.
He used to do this. For 2015, 2016 Trump, a gaffe like that would have had wall-to-wall network coverage. CNN would be in meltdown, MSNBC. BBC would be doing days of it. I mean, he just called a female journalist piggy. And, in fact, actually, the story took a couple of days to bubble up. That was at the weekend. And it's only really now in the last sort of 24 hours that it's actually broken through. The president, look, he had another go at someone yesterday in the Oval Office, an ABC journalist, for not being sort of subservient, for being badly behaved. He really just, he's not seeking re-election anymore, is he? He just doesn't give a monkey's.
Yeah, and also to the point, I'm sure you might chime in here too, is he does not have a great relationship with legacy media. He didn't need them. And I think that's the most, one of the biggest stories out of the 2024 election was he was
the
fine.
U.S. media needs Donald Trump.
Exactly, that's the story.
To the extent that he has a relationship with them, the adversarial relationship benefits him. And so his supporters like when he talks like this.
Yeah.
And they're not super offended by him talking
I think
like
some
that.
female voters, might take some issue with it.
And some swing voters,
he needs to
suburban swing
do better
voters
with those
in general.
female voters.
Yes, but the pearl clutching that people do about it, he said and done so many other things.
Yeah.
John McCain comes to mind.
This can't possibly be your breaking point.
That's the point. Like, if he's been through 3 elections now. 2. He says he won 3. He definitely won 2.
Right.
If this is what surprised you, nothing should surprise you with this ban anymore, right?
No, and I think that was a very good point. Like, this is the Republican base loves to see that. They love to see whether it's President Trump or possibly JD Vance. I mean, we've seen him kind of get.
Well, he's skillful at that himself. Yes.
Who did he snap at the other day? He called people cowards and traitors and snivelling cowards that have been attacking his staff. Do you think there's something about President Trump there? I know it's an awful thing to say, but he's very funny. Like when he does do it, it's just often just the right side of amusing to get away with it. He's like a kind of naughty schoolboy that you can't quite get angry.
As long as you have a personality, I think.
Whereas
there's
JD
a lot
Vance,
in the press that don't.
I worry with JD Vance have that same sort of comic timing beat and sort of glint in his eye that actually you can't quite stay mad at him forever.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it kind of it depends how they deliver it, right? And I think we're used to seeing President Trump say things like this. That's part of his personality. I don't necessarily think we are used to seeing JD Vance like that. So maybe the more we see him, maybe it would go over better. But I don't. If he was the one that said it, I think it would have been there'd be way more pushback than we've seen so far.
Verbally, he likes to operate on a higher plane.
He's a bit sort of intellectual. He likes to write sort of 1,000-word tweets.
His X account, he'll do the 1,000-word tweet, but he might stick an insult in the first line or call you a name. But it's a little different than when Trump does it. Maybe a little more rarefied, but.
Do you think we'll see, as that sort of, we don't ever say these words in the White House, I hear, but as he becomes more of a lame duck, will we see him a bit more unleashed?
I don't know. I don't know if he'll ever be a lame duck. I think once he's out of the White House, if he's having to go along the campaign trail to make sure the next, MAGA crown carries on, I think we're going to hear even more from him. It could be even more wild.
An attack dog, lame duck.
Guys, got to wrap it there. I'm afraid we're out of time. Alex, Jim, thank you so much. Come back and see us soon. That's all we've got time for. See you tomorrow.